Ideas and innovations can be real catalysts for social change. But often when we think about innovations, we tend to go, immediately to technologies like the smartphone or solar energy that can, better change and improve our lives. And perhaps a way to start our conversation this morning is to suggest to you that the most important innovations that society needs today, indeed even great cities need today, is not technological in nature. The most important innovation I would suggest to you that we need to think about right now is how we work better together to move faster, more smartly, more quickly in the directions we want to go. So that's really what this next section is going to be about. There are going to be two parts to this. Part one is big picture and conceptual. I'm going to share with you this concept of collective impact that I know some of you are familiar with, but I know not all of you that are here today are familiar with this concept. In a nutshell, it's about organizations working across sector, organizations and individuals working across sector, bringing together their resources and aligning and coordinating them to achieve progress at scale. That's what collective impact is about. So that's part one. I'm going to share a bit about that, give you the conceptual framework. And then part two is we're going to shift to a conversation here with the panel, with Emily and with Bob and with Allison and with Tony. This is the team that actually brought together, as I understand it, what we're in the midst of right now. And they are gracious enough to actually be here in a modeling sort of way. If what we're talking about is in innovations in working together differently, to really model that and talk a bit about their experience. And in having conversations with them prior to this, you might imagine that there's a bit of the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's some really exhilarating things that have happened, and there are also some frustrations that have happened. So we're going to try to explore those, and we'll try to explore those through the lens of collective impact. And while, as Susan said, the work that's been done to date is not what I would describe as full-on collective impact, I think the principles that we'll talk about are certainly in play here in terms of working together differently and how to think about doing that more effectively. So my hope for all of you is that in the next 45 minutes, you will get better insight and better hope into the fact that while things are way stuck in Washington, there can be a clear path to change at scale. Indeed, there already is happening efforts around change at scale and working together differently here in Dallas. So that's my hope. How's that sound? Great. Okay, let's have at it. So the notion of collective impact begins with a very simple premise, and that is this, that the way we attempt to achieve change at scale today is not working. Let me be more specific about that. In an article in Stanford Social Innovation Review that my colleague Mark Kramer and I wrote back in 2011, we characterized what is the prevailing approach to achieving change at scale in the social sector as isolated impact. Foundations and nonprofits often work independently of each other, and they often don't include government in business in trying to address the particular social problem that they're working on. And we suggested that we were starting to see the emergence of a different way of trying to achieve progress at scale. And that is by bringing people together to achieve collective impact. Organizations working across sector in mutually reinforcing ways towards common goals, measuring success in the same way, and working in a vastly different way than they'd historically worked. And we called this collective impact. Now, at the time, and this was back in about 2010, we knew that this, or we hypothesized that this really was absolutely critical, that we need, as a society, needed to move from isolated impact to collective impact. But we didn't ourselves really have a great sense of what it was that would allow you to actually achieve positive and consistent progress at scale. So we went out and we researched this question. And the question was, how are efforts, cross-sector efforts, effectively achieving positive and consistent progress at scale? And we actually didn't find many efforts that were. But we found a few. And when we examined those efforts, we found that they had a couple of things in common. 5 conditions that didn't guarantee that efforts would necessarily achieve collective impact and positive and consistent progress at scale, but optimize the odds. And here were the 5 conditions. First, organizations came together across sector to develop a common agenda. And by common agenda, we define that as coming to a common consensus and common understanding of the problem, because often we come at the problem from different directions, and agreeing to a joint plan of action and holding each other mutually accountable for achieving progress together. That's a common agenda. The second condition was shared measurement. That so often in the sector what we find is dozens and sometimes hundreds of organizations who are focused on the same issue, but they're measuring success differently. We were looking at homelessness in Calgary and found that they actually had, when you brought together the organizations that were working on homelessness, they had 1,200 different measures of progress and success. And people started wondering if they had more measures of success than they had homeless people. Mutually reinforcing activities. The third condition was that organizations work together, not necessarily to duplicate, do what they do best, but work together in ways that are mutually reinforcing of what others are doing. The fourth was the existence of continuous communication. The more I do this work, the more that I realize how so critical this is, that organizations can come together and come up with a common agenda, but they got to stick with continuously communicating in ways that build trust, ways that build relationships. Some of you have heard the expression, change travels at the speed of trust. And we've got to communicate continuously as we're collectively seeing, learning, and doing along the way to actually achieve progress. That was the fourth condition. The fifth was the existence of what we called a backbone organization, an organization or a set of resources whose sole purpose is the alignment and coordination of everybody else. People often ask us, okay, of these 5 conditions, which is the most important? And the reality is they're all important. But I would probably tell you that the number one reason that collaborations historically have failed to live up to their aspirations is that they failed to put in place a set of resources whose sole purpose was the alignment and coordination of what was going on. What was interesting is that as we continue to do our research and as we continue to start consulting in collective impact, it became very clear that this set of conditions was not sort of relevant for just one issue. That in fact we were seeing progress made where these 5 conditions were in place that applied to a wide variety of social and environmental issues. Let me give you a couple examples. In Cincinnati and northern Kentucky, over 300 organizations came together to address what they called Cradle to Career education, help kids from cradle to career. 300 organizations. So we had the public universities, we had the school systems, we had faith-based organizations, philanthropy, after-school nonprofits. We had the Metropolitan Housing Authority involved in this effort, all coming together around cradle to career progress for all kids. Strive measures 54 indicators of success. 5 years into the effort, they had 81%. They were making progress with 81% of those indicators. A year before that, 74%. A year before that, 68%. Progress at scale. And many of you are aware that there's a very similar initiative here in Dallas, inspired by the Strive work called Commit. Very, very powerful, great results happening. In healthcare, an initiative called Up Somerville, focused on child obesity prevention in a community outside of Boston of 80,000 people, very ethnically diverse. And in the space of 3 years, they were able to actually, at a population level, see a 15% decline amongst kids in their target grades 4 through 8 in their body weight. Over 3,000 kids, they saw these results with, 44% of whom were obese. This is an effort in Chicago called Opportunity Chicago. Initially started by philanthropy, but ultimately very cross-sector, including businesses and government and dozens of nonprofits, who set a goal of putting 5,000 public housing residents in jobs in 5 years. And after 5 years were over, they'd actually exceeded their goal by 20%, placing 6,000 people in jobs. Now, there's the what you do in this work, and there's how you do this. And I think what we found in this work is that it does require, for many people, some significant mind shifts in terms of how you think change actually happens. And I want to just talk about 3. The first mindset shift is moving from thinking there are technical answers, where if you have the right expertise or you have the right formula for success, you can apply it, you have resources, you can sort of solve the problem, to the fact that this is really about adaptive problem solving. Adaptive problems are problems that are complex. The answer is not known in advance, and it's the people who have the problem who need to solve the problem. And if you're going to lead in this work, you need to create the conditions for the problem solving to emerge from those that are engaged. The second is that there's no silver bullets in this work. There's only, to quote Al Gore, silver buckshot. Revolutions aside, the times that society has made significant progress, it's because progress was made on a whole bunch of small fronts at once that collectively add up to big change. Third mindset shift, sharing credit versus taking credit. Arguably the hardest of these mindset shifts. This relies on a set of players that are radically devoted to the health of the whole over elevating their individual part. Now, I think one of the things that we've found as we've gotten more and more into this work, that these are really, really tough mindset shifts for all of us to go through, and that there needs to be the right process and structure in place. We are talking literally, in some cases, tens of thousands of individuals and thousands of organizations who are aligning and coordinating their efforts. And how does that actually happen? You can't just get everybody in the same room at the same time and do it. We've got to have process and structure. And in researching and actually doing this work, we've found that all of these efforts are remarkably similar in terms of how they're organized. And this is a picture of what that looks like. They're typically overseen by a steering committee, a cross-sector set of players who actually are representative of the areas that actually touch the issue. So when we talk about we want to change the system, get the system in the room. There's a steering committee that oversees things. And then the work is chunked up into specific sub-strategies. So if we're working on child obesity, we might say, let's work on nutrition, let's work on exercise, let's work on infrastructure that might actually support better nutrition and exercise. And so the work is actually chunked up into people who touch that. And partners from the community engage at multiple levels of this. This is all supported by a backbone organization, which you see on the left here. Looks like it's really big, but it's usually just a couple of people who work to align and coordinate the efforts of thousands of others. This is neither top-down nor bottom-up. Somebody once said, top-down doesn't work anymore and bottom-up doesn't add up. This is a process that really nobody controls but has great intent to it in a direction towards a common goal. When I talk about the structure, or when I talk about the way this is organized, the way collective impact is organized, I say it's structured, rigorous, and disciplined, but it's also flexible and organic. Some of you might be saying, how could it be structured, rigorous, and disciplined, but also flexible and organic? So I want to give you a picture of what that actually looks like. And often when we think about complexity and solving complex problems, actually one of our best models and where we need to learn from is nature. So what I'm going to do in a second is show you a 30-second video. You'll see some birds flapping at the beginning, and then you'll see something happen.
And then, when the moment is right, they behave in a way that should be impossible.
So there you have it, structured, rigorous, and disciplined, and also flexible and organic. If you're really into that, you can go to YouTube and get about 20 minutes of that. It's called The Starlings at Otmore in the UK, but some of you may have seen that. Or go outside, look outside the window, and see that flocking. So scientists have actually studied why it is that birds flock and bees flock and fish flock. Did anybody know why that happens? What's the phenomenon that brings it around? So scientists have actually been able to simulate the flocking phenomenon. And they've done it by saying, okay, there's 3 rules that apply if you're a bird. Rule 1 is fly at the same speed as your neighbor. Rule 2 is maintain equidistance from your neighbor. And rule 3 is when you turn, always turn towards center. Because if you turn away, you'll fly out of the flock. Now, if you put those 3 rules together, you actually can produce the flocking phenomenon. If you take one of them away, you won't get it. So one way to think about the rules of the conditions of collective impact, the 5 conditions, is they are rules, if you will, for how we work and coordinate our activity together. What's also really cool when you think about the flocking phenomenon, and here's something I hope you can take back with you. The reaction time of a flock is 50 times as fast as the reaction time of any one bird. So when we talk about collaboration as, oh my goodness, it's going to take us longer to get there. When you can get that alignment and coordination, imagine a response time that is 50 times faster than any one individual organization can do. And I've started to see that happen in amazing ways. And we can get into that in a bit. So I want to wrap up here and sort of share the fact that what we're talking about here is intense collaboration. And it is different in our minds from a lot of the collaboration that you see out there. Why is that? One, what you're looking for and what happens in collective impact is you achieve a perpetual state of simultaneous planning and doing, because this is adaptive work. You're constantly in a continuous stage of saying, what do we need to do? Let's be doing stuff, and let's also reflect on it. And that is the nature of the work. No longer are we in an environment where we can sort of say, let's plan for 5 years, put the plan on the shelf, and implement for 5 years and come back. That is not the nature of this work. Allow for the shock of the possible. I have seen this happen. Response times that are 50 times faster. One quick example. We started working with the New York State juvenile justice system in 2012 with a cross-sector, very acrimonious group. There were actually 2 different groups at the table that were suing each other. Longer story that I'll share a little bit more about this afternoon if you happen to come to the session. We started working with them in 2012. By the middle of 2014, there were 45% fewer kids in the New York State juvenile justice system, and there was no declines in public safety. That's the shock of the possible. And I think anybody involved in that initiative would never have told you they could have done that in 2.5 years. Pay attention to relationships. This work is all about relationships are the fabric of social change. It's why it's so cool that you are all here in this room and making connections. You don't get movement at scale unless you have a fabric of relationships. Listen at how to respond to unanticipated results. This is complex work, bringing organizations together. Things will always change. So you've got to constantly keep your ears open for unanticipated results and look for the data that's going to tell you what's happening. And finally, I'll leave you with my favorite Peruvian proverb. The world will be changed by those with burning patience. The world will be changed by those with burning patience. And that's my wish for all of you. You've got to have the passion in the sense of urgency to say, we've got to get this done. But you also have to have the compassion to recognize that, in the empathy, to recognize that others may see things differently, and then, in fact, others may be bringing something that is beneficial to you. So, with that, that's sort of prepared remarks here. We're going to shift to the panel now as a bit of a setup for the panel. This is a spectrum of collaboration from very informal collaboration like, hey, let's get together and have a meeting, to fairly intense and rigorous and structured collaboration, which we would call collective impact. And I think what's interesting is when you think about the 5 conditions of collective impact, they can apply really at any stage here. And it'll be interesting as we talk to this group who, again, have generously put themselves on the stage to talk about their collaboration, which is not dozens upon dozens of organizations. It's several organizations. It is cross-sector, nonprofit, and business coming together. And they're experiencing a lot, as I talk to them, really the things that actually come up when you get below the surface of what it takes to actually work together differently to achieve change. So with that, I'm going to shift over here, and we'll begin the panel. Thank you.